Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And did you know that 90% of Americans have actually been victimized in some way, shape, or form by an online scam? But only 50% of us actually would get off the grid to protect our data. Now, here's what's going on. According to a survey that was basically commissioned by MoneyGram, the most common digital security threat facing America today is some type of scam, with 63% of their respondents saying they've actually experienced basically a money scam. Now, it gets worse. 56% said that they have been a victim of fraud, 54% said their social media account has been hacked, and nearly half of the respondents, 49%, have been victims of an actual data breach. Now, these numbers may seem high, but consider this. Many of the respondents admitted that they engage in risky online behavior. So, for example, 10% said they would actually answer a phone call from an unknown number or an email from an unknown origin. 1 in 8 said they would respond to romantic requests online from somebody they never met. 1 in 9 said they would respond to a job offer from a firm they applied to, especially if the email had a nearly but not quite identical name to a famous global company. So instead of Facebook, maybe it's Smacebook, something like that. I don't know. Now, participants were also quizzed on common digital security red flags. And so 48% of people recognized the common scam of being asked to wire money to a stranger. 47% correctly identified whether somebody asked them for money with the promise of an even larger sum in return at a later date, recognizing that as a scam. And finally, 44% said they have never been fooled by a phone call from a fake government official asking for money to avoid jail time. That's a very common one. The IRS here in the United States calls you and says, you don't pay the IRS, you're going to jail, and people end up paying them. Now, when people were asked about their biggest online worries, respondents listed basically that their personal information exposed in a data breach was their most frequent concern. That was 53% of people. 52% of people basically said having money stolen from their online bank accounts or online money management, whatever that is, and 52% also said having their social security number stolen. The top 5 on top of these were basically rounded out with malware designed to infiltrate online banks. That was half of the respondents, and fraud, which was 47%. But only 50% of this aggregated 9 out of 10 Americans said that they would consider, not actually doing it, just consider living off the grid to make their data safe. Now, I think this shows us actually a couple of different things. We are willing to take risks online even if we're aware that we are not properly defending ourselves or can even spot all the ways that we are being scammed. We basically are not risk adverse here, and that's, I think, getting us to basically be an issue. If only 50% of us are willing to go off the grid to protect data, I think this kind of shows a level of addiction to technology as well that makes us accept risk just for the endorphin hits of like, followers, etc. Studies have shown that people are basically addicted to social media. They are constantly on their phones all the time. I see it, in the world. I've probably been guilty of it too, as well at some level, but I see people that simply cannot get off their phones. We've seen increases, in depression and all of that. In relationships, it's called flubbing. Basically, when you snub your partner to use your mobile phone instead of interacting with that person as well. So we have these serious things, but a lot of people don't realize that they can minimize their risk online without having to go off the grid. And that's the last thing I want to talk about. So, for example, don't sign up for absolutely everything. The more websites you're exposed to, obviously, the more potential for a data breach or you're having your personal information exposed. You can get off social media or minimize your footprint or your impact. So, for example, on Facebook, I have a public presence, which you might actually be watching or listening to me on right now, but I really don't have a private side, and I have a private Facebook account that administers my public side, but the only reason why I have that now is basically for the public side. But people post everything, they get engaged, they interact with their friends, and I understand that. But when your friends get hit, and I literally just had one 24 hours ago send me a message with a fake video link that said, "Is this you?" And immediately I had to laugh. I'm like, oh my God, he just got hit. This is the problem. Most people don't recognize these things. Most people don't even know what multi-factor authentication is. And I think this is the last point. point. So you can have all of these online things, and if you're running multi-factor authentication, you're significantly harder to hit. Go get an authenticator app, like Authy or Duo, or, take your pick. I don't care. Google, Microsoft, there's a whole bunch of them, and start enabling multi-factor authentication in your life. Interestingly enough, outside of this survey by MoneyGram, Pew did research on cybersecurity techniques about a year or two ago, and 89% of the respondents to their surveys could not identify what multi-factor authentication is when given 4 different pictures of MFA, of multi-factor authentication. This shows me we have an education problem here, and as we continue to educate our workforces, our populations, our kids, our spouses, our parents, all of that, I think this problem starts to go away. But until then, we're going to continue to fall for scams. We're not getting off the grid. People understand these risks, and then what does that say about us? How do we actually combat that? I think that's something that we really need to take to heart. We really need to talk about, because I think it flows over into other things. If we're willing to believe email, we might be willing to believe disinformation. These are the kinds of things that all go together. We have to train our populations. And by virtue of that, just looking at these numbers, with 9 out of 10 people, at least in the United States, experiencing some kind of victimization online, that's a serious issue, and it's only going to get worse. So that is your news of the day. Make sure you're educating everybody. Make sure you're enabling multi-factor authentication, limiting, creating controls for yourself to limit the flow of information out there, and hopefully you'll be a little bit more safe. And obviously, that's not the be-all, end-all of everything I just said. There's a lot more you can do, but I think that's a good start. So with that, that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.